Draft week is finally upon us today. I'll comb through the latest news and market movement with Connor Allen, Scott Smith. We'll touch on the movement in the positional over-under market, look at both some team to draft player stuff, team to draft position stuff, and we finally have an Aaron Rodgers trade. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Brian Noonan, joined here as always by Connor Allen, Scott Smith. We're going to jump into it and just lots of news. And we just before we set to come on, and we had this set ahead of time, we get the breaking Aaron Rodgers news. Connor, you want to let folks know what's going on finally with the trade that was inevitable and now has finally happened. The Connor. Screw you, internet. Connor, tell people about Aaron Rodgers. Connor.
Yeah, no. So the official trade just went through. It looks like the main point there was Aaron Rodgers obviously is now on the Jets, but swapped picks 13 and 15. And I think that's the major implication there for the NFL draft specifically. So now the Packers have picked 13, the Jets have picked 15. My immediate thoughts and where I messaged you guys was, and we just go right off the horn here, was Broderick Jones, his over-under was a 13.5 and 14.5 playing on the book. Rich, I don't know, Chimini or whatever it is. The Jets reporter said that the Jets were focusing in on Broderick Jones. We've seen multiple other tweets suggesting that the Jets are focused on offensive linemen. So kind of looking at all this draft board is my immediate inclination, and I hit the over right away. And I think would take it at 14.5, 13.5. Now, I don't know. I know, Scott, you suggested that maybe the Packers could be in on a guy like Broderick. At 13, I think they could have options like Lucas Van Ness, maybe Miles Murphy, maybe a couple other guys on the defensive line. I mean, any thoughts on this right off the top here?
Yeah, I think whenever you start looking at Green Bay and the trait-based, way that they draft, Broderick Jones would fit within some of what they do. I tend to think that they are looking at one of a couple of other players, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Miles Murphy, and Lucas Van Ness are the ones that I'm more leaning to. When it comes to Broderick Jones in particular, my model that mixes in both like consensus big boards and mock drafts across the industry has Broderick Jones sitting at 14.1 right now, which is right in that 14.5 threshold. I think with this movement, Broderick Jones has kind of been the chalk for the Jets across all mock drafts. I still think it's a good play sitting there at over 14.5. I think the Jets are still in play and out. And there's other tackles that could be on the board still. Skoronski kind of projects more to a guard. I tend to think that he would be in play for the Jets should he fall down. So there's still some other players that could push Broderick Jones further down the board as well.
And New England's right there too. I still suspect that New England does not make that pick. Just, again, historical trends, need-based, the fact that they have so many needs. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens. But I get how this works, and this has kind of been how it works from jump, is you basically have a match lit into a forest, and there's news and there's reactionary news, and lines start to move pretty quickly. So just based off of, I think Scott's point, there are a handful of tackles, and it becomes really about positional or not positional needs, but really team specific boards. And you can have a guy like Anton Harrison keeps moving his way up. A team that wants a tackle and maybe doesn't need the versatility that someone like Skoronski could offer. Like, these guys are kind of all getting bunched in all over the spot. So yeah, finally good to have that one off the boards. We knew it was coming. It's good to finally have the specifics around it. We didn't think that the first round picks would be in play, but again, I think it is not nothing that those were involved in the swap. Knowing, I think the Packers know that the Jets were kind of set to take an offensive lineman, and that offensive lineman is in play as a long-term answer at a tackle position for the Packers. So I don't think it's nothing that those were involved. Whereas I've seen already kind of instantly people are like, no big deal that those are involved. And I kind of disagree.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't know. I mean, so it's not strong enough for you guys to make it an official play, is it? I mean, I liked it. I played it personally. I was gonna rip it in the Discord, but I wasn't sure, how you guys felt. So I wanted to obviously figure we're coming on in 3 minutes. We could talk about it. It looks like at this point, as we're discussing it, we're looking at 14.5 minus 160 on DraftKings, minus 150 on DraftKings. We're looking at FanDuel minus 188 at 14.5. At that point, I don't know. I mean, it seems like it's a little bit rich, but I don't know. Scott, you're kind of hemming and hawing, I think. And I think both of you guys are just kind of on the fence. So probably don't want to lay that much juice on something like that then.
It's just one of those things where the number is right there towards what the projection is, and it's easy to see him fall on a pick ahead or a pick behind that. So it's one of the things I'd definitely be on the fence about, and I might actually just wait and see if a little bit more movement in one direction or another comes about. But hey, shout out to Green Bay and New York for actually getting this done before we come on the show, rather than Carolina and Chicago, what they've done to us.
Yeah, that was not fun for us. We had just finished recording a hour and a half show and been offline for maybe 30 minutes, and the Chicago and Carolina deal finally went through. So, or we'd all thought that Chicago was going to make a trade. So PBHs, some 13.5. Check out yours. Obviously, some of those move a little bit slower than domestics, so definitely worth shopping for. And we get news like this, some of this stuff could be so quick. And if you get anyone that's a little bit laggy, take advantage. I would. Again, if you're getting a good price on 13.5, I'd be interested. Now that we're 14.5 with kind of where New England could do a number of things, it's a hold off for me. So good for you, Connor, though, acting quick and getting on it at the right time. So I want to remind folks, again, betting subscription to 444 gets you access to all the picks, everything on the site. Go to 444.com/plans. We've made it cheap for you if you want to get access to draft stuff. Again, we're only a couple days out, but we're going to have lots of content and hopefully a handful of picks here still to come here in the next few days. You partner with one of our, we've partnered with a few different sites. You can go over to Vivid Picks, go to the App Store, download Vivid. It is a pick'em site. Promo code 444BET and use that promo code. Minimum deposit of $5 and you get a 3-month betting subscription. Again, just for $5. They'll match your deposit all the way up to $200 though. If you want to play very, similar to other pick'em sites that out there, Vivid is a good one. I know Connor crushed them all season long last year. They do have tackles as well, so I'm going to get into Vivid Streets this season for cheap way for you to get access to all we have going on. So, Connor, I'll start with you. Lots of different movement. Again, we talked about Will Levis quite a bit with VR on Friday when we did our live mock. We've had some more reporting on that since that makes me feel a little bit better of it. Someone we've had a question to, like, we're really not getting anything from the mainstream media around Levis. It's just kind of the betting markets that have really moved. You're not getting any concrete reports. Some of the same drum beats in terms of, hey, Houston's very comfortable going off board. They're going to go with one of the tackles and address either the quarterback position at 12 or somewhere else. What are your thoughts on Levis? Again, kind of feel like we've flattened out, but where do you stand currently on Houston at number 2?
Yeah, so we saw the market actually before our last show. It was like plus 380 or so for Will Levis to be the number 2 overall pick. We played that officially, and then now we're looking at Will Levis to be minus 140 to be the number 2 overall pick. And I think at this point, like, plus 380 implied odds are around 25%. I think all of us were kind of looking at probably closer to 60% of Will Levis being the pick. And so now you're looking at right around there, around minus 140. And the odds continue to move that way. The mainstream media, for some reason, just has no inclination that this is the case. We're hearing otherwise behind the scenes. Now, that being said, I think that that's generally concerning. Like with some of our other instances where we've gone against the mainstream media, we've had a guy like in the draft room or like someone that we're like, this is happening, like we have multiple people saying this. I feel pretty good about our sources, but not sure I feel good enough to go against every single national reporter the entire time. Now, my issue is there's not really a good way to hedge right now. So if they don't go quarterback, is it Tyree? Is it Will Anderson? Is somehow CJ Stroud still on their board? Like, those are questions that we don't really have answers yet. And so I'm fine with where we're at. We have a Levis 2 ticket at plus 380. I'm also fine with potentially hedging out if we get more clarity on any of it, because I think that the Texans just seem to be doing their own thing. And like, they don't seem to be conforming to anything, kind of what Scott mentioned too. So thankfully we're in a spot where we beat the market. We're in a good spot here holding the Levis tickets, but now it's about how we adjust new information, because I'm not fully take locked on Levis at 2 right now.
I'm not either, but I do really like it. And I do think some of the reporting that the source stuff that we got that made us fire on it makes me feel pretty good about it, because I think that leads to what we're getting in terms of what you're hearing from the Peter Schrager's of the world or Daniel Jeremiah's, is that they are undecided. And to me, that kind of matches some of the other reporting that we're getting, is that there are multiple teams exploring the option who have also become enamored with Will Levis through this process. And that was kind of my original pushback months ago, when I was like, hey, Will Levis is priced off market in terms of first quarterback off the board, partially because like he had Liam Cohen at Kentucky. Cohen came from Sean McVay, and you were going to get Will Levis in these meetings, and he was going to go up on the whiteboard and he was going to talk NFL offense in a way that was different than a CJ Stroud, in a way that's probably even different than an Anthony Richardson. And I'm not surprised that some teams have kind of become enamored with it. The S2 stuff has worked very well in Will Levis's favor. So now again, people will poke holes in the prospects. I think they all have their flaws for sure, without a doubt. But I think some of the unknown that's kind of coming up with, like, they're comfortable taking a defender. From the Texan side, it's like we might trade out of that. So we did do a good job at somewhat convincing Scott, who was definitely more than on the fence on Friday's show, and getting on board with us at the plus 380. And I think partially to Connor's point, it was a number play too. But Scott, have you heard anything, or kind of where are you at on the Texans, Levis? And then again, the Tyree and Will Anderson thing too, because it's kind of where we're at still.
So I think there's a couple of different ways to think about it whenever we're talking about Houston. Essentially, there's 4 players. I think Stroud may be a bit on the outside looking in, but I feel like it's really only one of 2 players. And the other player that I'm leaning towards is Will Anderson, who's sitting at plus 350 right now on DraftKings. So if you kind of wanted to hedge and you had a unit on Will Levis and a unit on Will Anderson, if it hit on one of those 2, you're still going to come out positive on either one of those plays. So I think when you start looking at just the Alabama connections, like within the Houston management and front office, between the coach, the GM, just all the way across the board. And then the rumors have come out that Will Anderson has a near perfect grade. But I think you can look at it from that side if they don't go Levis. If it is Levis, the argument for that is that they're not going to have a chance to get Levis again. They would have to trade up from 12, possibly to 3, to come all the way up. And there's no telling that Indianapolis or one of these other teams don't already have a deal in play with Arizona, to where if player X is on the board, that's an automatic push it through and the trade's done. Like it's a handshake agreement, like if that scenario plays out. So there's a lot of things that can happen. I tend to think along the logic that a team does not have a direction if they don't have a quarterback. And there's no way to go ahead and say that Houston's going to be right back in the mix, even if they don't draft a quarterback next year, to go ahead and be in the play for one of these other quarterbacks that you're going to have at the top of the board next year. That's just a lot of unknown as to a bunch of things that can happen. So for me, I think 99 people out of 100 within that Houston office can go ahead and be in on not taking Levis. And the people that have the bottom line to deal with and selling tickets and all of that, you're not going to have a fan base get behind a team that doesn't have a direction and doesn't have a quarterback. So I do tend to lean a little bit more towards Levis, and that's within the last exercise of the mock draft that I released today, it reflects Levis going at 2.
Yeah, Connor, the thing with them addressing the quarterback at 12 is that you are basically saying, I'm okay throwing my hands up and allowing 2 division rivals to make their choice ahead of me, and then we'll just take whatever's left. And I think that that's very, very flawed way of thinking. And it'd be really kind of strange to me for them to trade up from 12 after having the option of your guy at 2.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Mingo put it out in his mock with the Texans. Is like, we have 3 historical examples of teams, having 2 first-round picks and always choosing the quarterback at the first pick. I mean, the Giants are the most recent one, because everyone was like, oh, they can probably get Daniel Jones. It's, 17 or whatever it was. I think it was like 6 and 17. They picked him at 6 because the risk just far outweighs the reward of that whole scenario. Because, of course, if you are running a bunch of simulations, like, yeah, more often than not, maybe you can get Will Levis, or maybe you can trade up to get Will Levis, but you're only doing this once. So there's only one opportunity. You don't have any buybacks. If the Texans don't get a quarterback here, what are they doing? They don't really have many other opportunities here. Maybe it's like they have to overpay for Trey Lance, who, I mean, I guess you can sell tickets off that because at least there's some hope, but it's just something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, I think. And it's more of we as outsiders think, oh, well, all the mocks have him here. You know, in my fantasy draft, I can trade up. Like, it just doesn't happen in the real like NFL draft like that.
The Trey Lance stuff is the only thing that I have that's giving me trepidation on Will Levis. I think the reporting that I trust that we have sourced is that Will Levis is clearly their guy, if in terms of non-Bryce quarterbacks at 2. And
Agreed.
the ties to Trey Lance make a lot of sense. You know, obviously the offensive coordinator, the coaching staff from San Francisco. That's the only thing that gets in the way for me with the Will Levis stuff. I feel, again, it's just a source that's been really rock solid for a couple of years in a few different ways, and feel pretty solid about that. So I'm going to bounce around because we've been typically running. We'll spend 2.5 hours talking about the top 10. Some other big movement has been in the running back position. We've had both Peter Schrager and Todd McShay in their recent reports, both on Good Morning Football and today with some of the stuff that McShay's put out, that basically reads like, oh, we're getting over 1.5. We're getting Jahmyr Gibbs at the tail end of round 1. We're coming off of probably within the last 48 hours that under 1.5 running backs was like minus 500 or something like that, Scott. So you have, again, been out of the three of us, have been the most recent to put pen to paper for a mock draft. Talk to me about Jahmyr Gibbs.
Throughout this entire draft process, it's been Bijan Robinson and a huge gap. All of the evaluation reports that I've read, you have Jahmyr Gibbs, who compares similar to an Alvin Kamara, that type of player. You start digging in and looking into his advanced metrics, and there's some concern about his tackle breaking ability. His start stop is really like the best trait that he has as far as being able to go ahead and break things. He is getting a bit of juice here to go ahead and go at the end of the first round. But I start looking at Buffalo, what's one of the teams, and Dallas is the other team that he's kind of been linked to. And I don't see a fit with either one of those two teams. I think there's a lot of rollover with specifically in Dallas and what they have at running back already. You have other analysts out there and evaluators that have Zach Charbonnet as the number 2 running back in this draft, and he's more of a 3-down player, can go ahead and take the pounding and be a true alpha type running back. I think I have seen some evaluations that have Jahmyr Gibbs as the 15th highest player on some boards. So I think there is some smoke there. I just I look at teams, and specifically Tampa Bay's had a good bit of contact with Gibbs, and even Arizona is another team that I think you could look at that maybe would move up and move it up a couple of different slots to move into the first round. But I just think we've hit and harped so much on Bijan Robinson and the value of drafting a running back in the first round, and it doesn't make sense to me from a value standpoint to go ahead and not only draft the running back up in the first round, but to give up extra picks and extra assets to move into the first round to do so.
Yeah, very well said. What do you got here, Connor?
Yeah, so if we go through the teams here at the back half of the first round, and we're looking at, by the way, this is like basically even now. We're looking at plus 130 on under 1.5 running backs at FanDuel, I believe. Yeah, I mean, or it's about even money basically everywhere. DraftKings, FanDuel, BetRivers all has it up here. But if you look at the teams at the bottom half of the first round, I'm not sure I fully buy it. I mean, Chiefs at 31 don't strike me as a team that would ever do that again. The Eagles maybe at 30, Dallas at 26. Maybe Buffalo at 27. I mean, I know all it takes is 1 year, but I mean, I don't know. Like when I'm doing these mock drafts, even before this news came out, I was trying to start to like fill in the back half of my mock draft. I mean, there's 20 guys who are quote unquote first round locks with like the last 10 picks. I don't know. Like for me, it's just one of those things that it's not a valuable position. The guy is, I think good, but like I don't know if he's like that special that he deserves first round caliber quality. I'll let it get steamed. If it gets to like significant plus money, I'll be taking the under. I mean, if we had gotten a no on Jahmyr Gibbs a week ago, I mean, it would have been like minus 200, probably minus 300. And now
it basically was in the 1.5 market, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. And we've gotten a couple of reports lately saying that, like he's a lock. I don't know. It just, to me, it seems like there's been too many other guys that have also said the same thing, that just because we're told this now and because he's a running back, everyone's all excited about him going in the first round.
Yeah, it's hard to chase the number where it's at now. But again, like when we talk about some of the national reporters that we trust, when it's coming in the same day from McShay and Peter Schrager, I think it's, the movement makes sense, and it's something that we should be respecting as much as it feels like it flies in the face of things that make sense to us. That to me is a perfect transition to the quarterback position, which, we've been, I think we've kind of all been anti Hendon Hooker in round one based on previous shows. The drumbeat guys is something that's just getting very hard to ignore. A similar spot where, basically even, again, shop your odds as we record. There's, might be minus 122 on one side. It's basically the expectation. And based off of Hendon Hooker's over under on a few books too, he's right on the cusp in terms of where he's been booked too. So Scott, I'll go back to you on the Hendon Hooker thing. We've been but like, we just keep hearing from national reporters. Yes, it's hard to find a home though, but I would love your thoughts here.
So I think it's definitely going to have to be. I mean, you're talking 23 is Minnesota maybe, and if it's not that, it really has to be a trade up. Like for me, I'm against it. It just doesn't make sense to me as far as a player that is going to have to redshirt basically his rookie year, and so you're paying a premium to move up to the first round to get an extra year out of a guy who's not going to be part of your team and not gonna add anything to the team as far as being able to compete within 2023 and possibly even 2024. However, my thoughts aside, there's a lot of smoke, and it's coming from the right sources, and it's coming from a lot of sources. As far I've been on the record that I'm completely against it from a philosophy, strategic, team building standpoint, and I don't think it makes sense at all. And whenever I look at my model right now of where I have him, his average comes in at pick 33.08. So that's right there on the cusp, the first pick or two after. As a matter of fact, his average equals out to pick 32, just behind Emmanuel Forbes, which is basically the 31st player on my board. So, I mean, it's in the range, and where there's smoke, there's usually a little bit of fire. So I think, you can start looking at this line, and it's looking more and more like it's going to happen no matter how much we're against it.
Yeah, and that's what this is about, right? I mean, we are trying to make smart bets. We're trying to build as accurate as possible mock drafts. The team stuff we'll start doing in the weeks after the draft is done. Again, bring home the points, Connor. 25 coming off of an ACL, you're redshirting him. So basically, the first time you're actually going to really get a look to see if he's your guy, he's going to be 26. We are tiptoeing into Brandon Weeden territory here, which felt like a mistake that teams wouldn't make a second time. Again, an offense that hasn't translated to the NFL very well. It's kind of a one side of the field read, spread, very, very unique offense. What are your thoughts? Again, it doesn't stop.
Yeah, it's just not a bet I'm willing to take at this point. When there's like 3 weeks of reporters saying, that they're going to see another quarterback in the first round, it's not just a bet I'm willing to take. And the payout's just not enough. Like if we're getting like plus 300, plus 400 on no quarterbacks, and sure, yeah, I would be interested in maybe sweating this out. But at like plus 150, I don't know. I'm just not really like, when we consider going against like national reporters, I think that the payout just has to be right. Like if we trust our sources as much as we want, and we saw that with Paolo, again, we were getting like massive plus money. The market shifted there. We trusted our sources because we had, we were able to get down a lot on a significant edge against the market. Now at this point, like we're just not. It's like, an even money bet. I would just prefer not to bet against everyone who's saying that Hendon Hooker is a first round pick.
And it's Hendon Hooker, the sweat you really want to have dripping on draft night.
Yeah, every trade up.
When you look at it, there are players on the back end that you could go ahead and take a stand on that this is my guy and this is who I'm leaning on that's going to go in the first round, other than Hendon Hooker. So there are some other numbers out there. I mean, you've got a handful of different guys that you could go ahead and plant your flag in the ground and say this is my guy that I'm rolling with and get better numbers on.
Yeah. Hayden brought up here, he asked, where's Levis ranked on the board, the reference? I know Hayden and Josh do great work over at Underdog. Hayden has been a notorious, not a fan of Levis throughout the process here, and was one of the original people saying that he might fall, which is very, very reasonable considering everything we know about Will Levis. But Scott, I don't know if you have any insight there into where he is ranked on the board that you have.
Yeah, currently he's the model has him at 10.46.
There you go. It's significantly lower than consensus of where he's probably going to go in the draft at this point. It seems like, huh?
The floor is 4. We know the floor is 4. I also feel that that's, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that reporting is also very strong. If he happened to be passed up on by the Texans, that he is the play for the Colts. Now, people telling us that the Colts don't want to take a quarterback, that's fine. I think ownership is getting involved in both of these spots. So, while the GMs might want to take other players and might not have a clear cut there, I feel like those are quarterback teams. So we'll see.
Yeah, and one quick thing on Levis, that part of my model not only adds in consensus boards but also like mock drafts and specifically like team needs and stuff like that. And the biggest thing that's weighting Will Levis down is going to be his evaluation, which sits around 18 on a lot of the consensus boards. So when you add that in to where he's being mocked and start to kind of hit on some of the things that are modeled, that's what's going to go ahead and put him at 10, which kind of puts him in no man's land as far as like the draft goes. And you could kind of see him maybe going there to Tennessee. But if he doesn't get picked at 2, he's most certainly going to get picked at 4. I just don't see Indianapolis passing on Will Levis to go Anthony Richardson or one of these other guys.
Yeah, totally agree. And one other thing here too that I didn't want to miss, that was at the top of the show. Cameron Resnick brought up Paris Johnson plus 3,300 for first non-QB. So this third pick with the Cardinals here, and that's what it would have to be. So, I mean, there's been rumors coming out that the Cardinals want an offensive tackle, and I believe that. I fully do believe that, just based on their visits, based on just everything that they want. But I think that it's in a trade back scenario. So I have a hard time believing that they'd stay at 3 and pick Paris Johnson over Tyree Wilson if he's there. But maybe in a situation where it goes Bryce Young and then Will Anderson 2, or then Tyree Wilson 2, and then at the third pick, they're with the choice between Will Anderson or Paris Johnson. I mean, the reports behind the scenes are that they don't really like Will Anderson at all. And, I think in that situation, maybe Paris Johnson would be in consideration. So I don't hate 33-1, but I mean, you kind of have to like galaxy brain your way there a little bit. Like, it has to be a very specific situation. Something I do like with this situation, though, is Cardinals taking offensive lineman is like plus 250 in some spots, because I think if they do trade back, which I consider to still be likely, I think they're very, very focused on getting an offensive lineman. So that's it. I think DraftKings right now, most other books had it. They're pulling it off, putting it on off and on here with kind of the news shifting. But I think anything above like, plus 150, there's a really good look, because based on everything we've heard, I think they want to draft an offensive lineman.
And that pick is more valuable if Will Levis goes 2, right? Theoretically, there's a spot for teams to move up and have, the incentive, and gives you more options. And again, if I'm the Cardinals, you can look at whatever trade chart you want, the old school Jimmy Johnson stuff, whatever. You take 50 cents on the dollar on the trade chart to move out to get anything out extra. That roster is barren of talent on both sides of the ball. You kick the tired, you can down the road for next year. You're really going to make probably at least 8-9 games without Kyler Murray this year. You need to add talent, and you need to get more picks and more people in the building. So, even if it's not, it's not going to be something received well on social when the trade chart comes out and they tell you how much they should have got for that, like, take something, get down and get out of that spot. So I'll be interested there. Very to a good quarterback. And again, I feel like that's been, he's talking about that if they mail it in this year, they need a lot of help. Like, I feel like that's been where kind of an easy Hendon Hooker mock was early in the process. I've been fairly adamant. I don't think that the Vikings are staying there and making that pick. Now, again, there are a lot of trade down teams and very few trade up teams. But again, the Vikings have 5 picks in the entire draft. I think they would love to get some cornerback help. Maybe a wide in there, just taking 4 other players in the draft and adding Hendon Hooker is a smart thing that we should expect. I think an analytically forward general manager is going to do. So,
and the one thing I would note on specifically the Vikings, the other thing that I would note specifically on the Vikings going quarterback is that if the Vikings are indeed interested in Hendon Hooker and other teams are getting news and notes of it, then Baltimore only has like 5 or 6 picks this year. Baltimore is a prime spot for a team to trade up. And if it's for Hendon Hooker and teams are worried about the Vikings, it would be in front of the Vikings probably to do so. So that's one of the teams that I would look at. But, I just don't see the Vikings in a weak NFC going ahead and punting a first round pick to go ahead and not compete.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
That makes a lot of sense there.
Connor, go ahead and talk to me about tight ends. We've had a lot of shifting stuff with Dalton Kincaid, his medicals. We have some Darnell Washington medical issues. That number has moved quite a bit. We've been, waiting for it to maybe get to a spot where it's bettable. Now it's kind of shifting away from us. I think under is definitely probably a fair bet, especially if you're adding a fifth quarterback and a second running back. But I feel like who the guys are, I feel like I would be interested in under 1.5 at this point, depending on the price. What are your thoughts on the tight end position?
Yeah, it's tough because I definitely liked the under 2.5. I was looking at it this morning because as soon as we got the news from, I don't remember who exactly released it, but Darnell Washington failed some of his medicals and some teams flunked him outright, and that's a big deal here for a guy who was kind of already fringed for, was known as a better blocker, but obviously his upside as a player in general. I mean, we're looking at minus 200, minus 250 and half tight ends. I just don't think that I would probably still lean under there. Honestly, I don't think we see 3, but we tried it the other night. We did our mock draft the other night and we're sitting there with 5 picks left and none of the tight ends have come off the board. I mean, now in that situation, obviously I would probably go back and change my mock draft and probably put someone else in there at earlier slots. But just given the exercise that we did, whatever, 5 of us at a time, it was tough to find a spot for 3 tight ends. So for me, I would like under still here, even at minus 200. I think that's a decent look.
Yeah, we laid down for Daigle, but it's definitely not something that I think any of us wanted to do. Scott, where are you at on the tight end situation?
I think whenever you start looking at it, Dalton Kincaid's 24 years old, basically he's been dealing with a back injury throughout this entire process. He has gotten cleared for some of the medicals and stuff, but I think you're looking at those two, and even with Kincaid, you've got some guys like Jeremiah that are way high on him, has him as a top 10 player in this draft, and you've got some other people that are a bit lower on him because he's a little bit limited as a blocker. The injury and the age, incomplete workouts throughout the entire process, I tend to think that Michael Mayer is going to end up being the first tight end off the board ahead of Kincaid. And there's a number of spots that it can be, talking all the way from 13 with Green Bay now, all the way down to the end of the draft. It's hard to pinpoint some of those teams. You're talking about maybe the Chargers, maybe Detroit. There's a lot of different places that either one of these guys can go and fall at.
Really hard to mock any of the tight ends right now. So, but yeah, I'm with Connor. I mean, I'm fairly solid on the under 2.5. If you can still find it somewhere, maybe find a stalish line. Getting to some of the team position matchups or even player matchups. Again, shop these because there are offerings on DraftKings, Caesars, FanDuel. Your PPH might have some out there as well, some different prices out there. I have a handful that I jotted down, but I would love to get your thoughts, guys, of anything that jumps out to you in terms of, matching, like I said, either a player or a team positional stuff. Connor, do you have any nuggets you want to share?
Yeah, there was one that I thought was interesting later back in the draft. Bengals first pick corner. That's plus 280, Caesars plus 250. And I don't know, the birds are chirping that the Bengals are interested in a corner with one of their picks. And I thought that at a little bit more than 2.5 to 1, that it was a good look there. Otherwise I think that tight end could be in play for them, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure. But these tough later ones, it's a little bit tougher. But I think it, again, over plus 200, it's a fine look if you get a little bit of information, which I feel like we have. So
yeah, like the Bengals look, it's good info there. And you make a good point. I think especially as you get further down the board, laying chalk on some of this stuff gets really hard to do because there are just so many different moving pieces and things that can alter some of these too. Scott, is there anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, some of the big information that's come out over the last day or two is, Peter Schrager is one of the guys that you definitely have to listen to. And one of the things that he talked about this morning was that the news that he got over the week was that Jalen Carter doesn't make it past pick 6. When you start looking at matching specifically a player to a position, Jalen Carter to go, I think let's see, pick 5 is plus 600 and pick 6 at plus 380. So I like, dropping a unit on either one of those two. I think, getting a chance to him to go there at 5 or 6 is definitely something I'm going to be willing to take a little bit of a stab on.
At the same spot, I don't know if you guys saw it. So McShay had said that Detroit is the absolute end of a CJ Stroud run as well, which I think is very interesting. I think we've all kind of been back and forth in terms of what would Indy do if Levis is off the board at 2. Is that a Stroud or is that an Anthony Richardson thing? And, I lean Anthony Richardson, but we don't have that sourced out. So that's more conjecture than anything. But what do you think of that, Connor, the Stroud to Detroit at 6? We've also seen Josh Norris talk about, I'm going to be a Lions draft a quarterback guy at some point here.
Yeah, I think that at 6, there's two interesting, like, kind of fun ways to play it. I think Will Anderson and CJ Stroud both are like 7-1 and 10-1. I mean, I think it's very reasonable CJ Stroud could fall out of the top 4 or 5 picks there if his visit with the Colts went as bad as we thought it did at 4. If Seattle's not interested in drafting a quarterback or just isn't interested in CJ Stroud because it didn't possess the same kind of athletic upside that they're looking for, he could easily be there at 6 for them. And you just said that Peter Schrager, mentioned that they would stop the slide there. Will Anderson, on the other hand, I think also likewise, if 4 quarterbacks go in the top 5 and you're looking at Tyree Wilson being the top pick of Seattle, he's sitting there at 6. I don't know if he necessarily matches exactly what the Lions want, but I think kind of like Aiden Hutchinson, they'll just run him to the board because he's their best player on the board and fits with a lot of what they want culturally and would just be a great addition from day one. So again, these long shots get eaten up here pretty quick. So like we're looking at anything above like plus 200, plus 300 is like, I think, has any kind of legs is worth talking about. So we're looking at Will Anderson plus 750 on FanDuel to be the 6th pick, CJ Stroud 12-1 on FanDuel to be the 6th pick. So not necessarily souring on Witherspoon, but I think that there are other ways where someone else gets selected before him, and a quarterback or a player who's considered a consensus top 3 pick outside of quarterback position would definitely potentially take priority over Witherspoon.
And 2 things on that too that I think are interesting. So the Witherspoon thesis applies to the Raiders as well. The Raiders, I think they ran, believe, top 7 man rate, which has kind of been our thoughts too. Just schematically thought that there would be a better fit for what the Lions do for Witherspoon. I feel like that also applies to the Raiders. We have some intel that the Raiders are interested in a cornerback as well at 7, which I think is interesting. Waiting for a little bit more confirmation on that in the next 24 hours or so, but that's possible. And then the dominoes that can fall there with 6 is then it becomes very interesting to me that seems like we want to give the Lions a corner in round 1. That makes the 18 pick a little bit easier in terms of moving the pieces around. That can impact Joey Porter Jr. That can impact Deonte Banks in terms of where we slot those guys, thinking that the Lions, again, not having any corners on the roster after 2023, other than Cam Sutton, who they just added. Everyone else is, kind of on the final end of their deal. That makes it a little bit easier if some of these things start to piece together. And that's, again, how we have to kind of read some tea leaves and piece some of these things together, Scott. So what are your thoughts on the corners there at the end, or how that can impact Detroit's 2nd pick?
Yeah, I think the way the board falls, specifically with the high end, prospects that you have there in the top 10, it feels like it's a little bit easier for Detroit to have some flexibility with that 18th pick and how they want to go ahead and address things. And with the high end talent, if you would have one of these quarterbacks, if you would have Jalen Carter go ahead and drop there, I think it's a little easier to go ahead and pass on a guy like Devin Witherspoon, who they may love, but you're still going to have some other options there. And I think positionally, the gap in talent might not be as big as far as how they're grading these players on the board. So I definitely think that the Lions are in play for either of these quarterbacks, or like I said, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, any of those guys, should they drop there to him.
Yep. Still feel good about Witherspoon first corner off the board, less locked into Witherspoon being the Lions pick, depending on how the board falls. So, and as Connor mentioned, 10-1 is available on DraftKings for the Lions to take a quarterback, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. There's also, I think McShay or someone talked about Atlanta being the most likely spot to have a corner come off the board, which I found very interesting that he used such strong language regarding that, because I think a lot of us had penciled them or just kind of crossed off corner after they traded for Jeff Okudah, but then they obviously, had Casey Hayward released, and I think that kind of put them back in the market. And to be frank, I mean, should Jeff Okudah preclude you from ever taking a corner? Probably not. Right. Exactly. So I think that they're in play there. So I think that, obviously Witherspoon's numbers at 6.5. Maybe a Gonzalez under is worth a play. If you're looking at 6, 7, 8, all in play for a corner, I think it's still a little bit thin, but I think that there's definitely some rationale there. One more thing I wanted to bring up here, Antonio Esparza brought up, McShay said Seattle is simply not taking Carter. I sent out a tweet earlier today about Jalen Carter's draft stock. Schrager said he won't fall out of the top 6. Daniel Jeremiah said he doesn't expect the pick to be for Seattle. Tony Pauline said belief is that the Seahawks will target Jalen Carter. Todd McShay said multiple people told him the Seahawks will not pick Jalen Carter, and they had no mention of Carter to the Lions, even with him still on the board in his mock. Peter King has Seattle taking Carter, and Albert Beer said he heard Seattle and Lions both like him. No one knows about Jalen Carter. From my understanding, from behind the scenes, I don't think he goes 5 or 6, just based on all the tea leaves and what has been suggested. But I think what Scott said, like you can get like plus 600 on one of those picks. I mean, sure, that's fine. Again, it's plus 600. Like we can be wrong about those things because there's so many different like reports out there. But I still like our over 6.5 at around, I think, minus 130. We're looking at like 7.5 at this point. I don't know. Maybe it's a stay away at this point.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's, it is silly season. This is definitely a player that teams would want to have someone not locked onto the sense of what they want to do, because we're talking about a player with opened as a massive favorite to be the first defensive player off the board for a reason. So like it makes sense that teams would want to maybe play media guys against each other to get them off of them being linked to Jalen Carter. So we are still in silly season. A couple others that I wanted to note in terms of team to draft position. And again, just looking at the not favorites, basically, as I said, especially as we go further down the board, I think there are some interesting ones. Connor mentioned the defensive back plus 280 on Caesars for the Bengals. I think that makes a lot of sense. We've all been kind of locked in on the Eagles at 10, basically wanting to add something to the trenches, right? They want to add either an offensive lineman or defensive lineman. It's not really priced that way in the marketplace. It looks like it's a very clear defensive lineman or offensive lineman market. You can get a defensive lineman plus 200 on Caesars to go to the Eagles. And I feel like that's closer to a coin flip than that would indicate. I've seen increasing noise about the Giants looking to add to the offensive line. That's 4-1. Now, again, we're dealing with like a pick down at like 25. So this gets a little bit harder. But again, I feel like we're getting kind of locked into like cornerback and some other stuff there. So I think that one's interesting. And I will, for the last time, maybe not. We have 2 more shows this week. You can still get the Chargers 12-1 to add a corner. And again, I think that they would love to add a receiver here. They probably do. But I think corner is like next, and it should not be higher than 12 or 10. So 12-1 still get a corner. We were talking about that at 25 a couple of weeks ago. I still think that is very, very much in play and probably a pretty bad number. So that is available on DraftKings. Chargers to take a cornerback at 12-1. So that's all I got. We want to keep it a little bit shorter because we're going to do 3 shows this week. And again, we're still sore from the 2.5 hours on Friday of doing a marathon. We were going to do a second mock draft. We were going to do a second top 12. Would have been here for 3 hours. There would have been, we need to get food catered. It was getting messy. But Connor, anything else for the people before we wrap up the Monday show?
Last little bit here. Canby right now offering Anthony Richardson 5.5 plus money on the under. I really like that. I mean, again, the limits are garbage, so it's not like can't be an official play, but I think that there's a good chance Seahawks take him, even if a couple other guys are there on the board. So I like that under.
Yeah, and I still think the Colts are in play if Levis is off the board. Anything else for you, Scott?
Now, just going to be chasing down a lot of these rumors, looking at some of the tuned in media and kind of adjusting the process over the next 2 days. Interested in our show tomorrow. Supposed to have Nick Warisco on. He's really tuned in and chasing down a lot of these rumors and a lot of info for every team. You're talking to a lawyer who in his last mock draft had 13,000 word piece. So interested to get some of his takes on some of this stuff. And, I dropped the mock draft today. Just to be clear, when I do these, a lot of times it's an exercise just to kind of throw out some alternate situations of what may or may not happen. The one thing that I included in this most recent mock draft are teams and specific players that I think are linked. So be on the lookout for those guys that are in consideration at each team that I have listed.
Also go on to 4for4.com. You can check out John Dick's thoughts. I dropped a free piece, 10 mock draft there. Us coming Tuesday, and we'll have Anthony and Mingo joining us on Wednesday before we have to lock in some of those final bets, hit submit on those final mock drafts, and we'll go from there. So a reminder, wherever you're taking in the podcast, like, rate, review, all those things. Like on the video helps us. Share the video. It's draft betting. Share it with your friends. Winning draft bets together is the best way to do it. We appreciate that. And again, head over to 4for4.com/plans for a betting subscription, or download Vivid in the App Store. Vivid Picks, promo code 4for4bets, 4for4bet, no S. $5 minimum deposit. You can get a 3-month betting subscription. So for Connor and Scott, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.